Welcome, thanks for joining us. I'm Dawn with K2 Technologies. Welcome to our monthly webinar training series. Today's session is part one of our look at the top functions in Microsoft Excel. This is a two-part series because there's so much ground to cover on Microsoft Excel functions. But we want to make sure that we give you some foundation. So we're going to be looking at function basics. That is probably a review for most of you, but we really want to make sure that you get that baseline so that we can start building on it, not only this month, but next month as well. It's also important to understand an important concept in Excel that talks about cell references. There are relative references, absolute references, and circular references. And so although these apply beyond just building functions and formulas, they're key to really being able to effectively work with Excel functions. And range names. When we start building on more complex functions, that is, our focus is going to be on key functions. There are over 500 functions in Excel. Don't worry, we're not going to be even getting close to that, because even top Excel users, some of the experts that you may know, maybe you're one of them, probably only use a handful or two of functions. However, with those, some of them can have some complexities where range names becomes really valuable. And as this implies, it is naming a cell or range of cells in Excel so that you do not have to have direct cell references or cell addresses. And then we will start our look at data analysis functions. Now, throughout all of our training webinars, you are welcome to use chat or the Q&A function. And I'll do my best to address those questions, or we may address those afterwards as well. That is, we want to make sure that they're within the scope of our topic, but please take notes on whatever will be helpful for you. Let us know how we can assist you here at K2 Technologies. Now, next month, we're going to continue our look and build on more data analysis functions. So this month, we'll be looking at things like if, sum if, average if, and even one called ifs. Next month in February, this is going to be VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP. So some of those more complex ways to analyze our data. Additionally, we'll look at date functions and text functions and some other tricks with text that are built into Excel. So that's our plan as we explore Excel functions. It's good to just make sure, as I mentioned, get some of those foundational pieces taken care of. And so with that, then we have the structure of any function or formula, and function is really just a type of formula. It just has built-in ways to know how to do a calculation. So they all start with equals. And then you have your function name. Now, many of you likely are familiar with the sum function. And so it could be equal, sum, and then in parentheses are what we call the arguments. And the arguments can be fairly simple. This is simply the mathematical way of expressing what is it we need to know. And in the case of a sum function, it could simply be a range of cells that you want to total. Now, some functions like if and VLOOKUP will require multiple arguments. They will need different pieces of information to be able to give you the answer that you're looking for. And so that's one of the things that we'll start building on and working with us. One of the challenges we always have with functions is we really have to kind of know where we're heading. So the more familiar you can be with the different options that you have, then it's easier to explore them, whether you're simply looking for more specific resources on them. That is, Excel doesn't do a good job of being able to tell you which function to pick. You really already need to have some knowledge about which ones might be the best to solve the specific questions that you have to get you the answers that you want. Now, how we build these functions can be a variety of different ways. There can be direct manual entry. There is a function library that's in the Formulas tab in Excel. But here again, you need to know which function you're looking for. Now, these will break them into different categories: statistical, financial, and so on. Insert function. This is a helpful way to walk you through a function when you already know what you want, but you're not exactly sure how to express those arguments. Or if you already have a project, maybe it's something you inherited from a coworker. With that, you would be able to use insert function to show you the structure of that function, to really be a little bit of a mini tutorial on that. So insert function is typically to build a function, but it also can be a way to look at the logic of an existing function too. Formula autocomplete. You probably have noticed this. If you type in, for instance, equal, and let's say you type in sum, now that's all we need for that function. We wouldn't need this, but formula autocomplete, as you start typing that, will show you all of the functions that begin with those characters, like sum if and others. And so formula autocomplete is going to suggest to you the possible functions. But here again, it's always about, you need to know where you're heading. And then I'll share with you some different shortcuts that can be helpful for you as well. So let's go ahead and dive into and explore Excel functions. As I mentioned, we want to get some of these foundational pieces out of the way. So let's just start with some of our simple functions. And in this case then, as I mentioned, our most basic one is our sum function. Now there's multiple ways for us to be able to create that. We could type it in. Certainly I could say equal sum, and this is the example of the formula autocomplete. That is, as I start typing here, notice all of these possibilities. This can be really overwhelming. So these are all the possible functions that begin with those particular characters. Now, in this case, I'll simply then open parentheses, highlight this range. Then to finish it would be a closed parentheses. But Excel is smart enough, that is, if we hit enter right now, it will put the closed parentheses in there for you. So that's just a shortcut that might be helpful for you in some cases. Another way for us to build this, which here again, you may be very familiar with it, is our auto sum button. And so we'll find this in the home tab. Here's auto sum, as well as in the formulas tab. And if I select this, then Excel is going to look for the closest range. It's always good to verify that that is the correct range. That is, don't assume that Excel was smart enough to be able to figure out which one that was. But in this case, this works just fine. And I'll go ahead and enter. And then I'll take this, and using a trick called autofill. Let's zoom in here just so you can see this a little bit better. I'm going to look for that bottom right-hand corner, black cross here, and click and drag. And this is going to give me a contiguous copy. That is a copy down, or I could use it across. And I don't have to then continue entering that over and over and over again. Now, sometimes when we do these types of things, like a copy down, you can see here I've lost some formatting on that. Here's a quick little trick. It's not related to functions, but you'll probably be helpful when you are building out formulas, for instance. And it's something called the format painter. So I simply, and we have a quick video on the K-Score Technologies YouTube site that talks about the format painter. So I'm simply going to move to a cell that has that formatting I want to duplicate, and that is with this line. And in the Home tab, here's this little paintbrush. I click on it once, click on the cell, and I've copied or painted that formatting. So that can be also a big time saver for you if you already have something that has an appearance that you want to duplicate. We also have here, we'll also use that auto sum here in just a moment. But I want to mention as well that is if you're using sum frequently, this is something you could add to your quick access toolbar. Now the quick access toolbar starts off at the top of your, above your ribbon in the title bar, but now I've moved it down below that. And if you want to know more about that, that is one of many tricks that we share. We have a training, a previous webinar on Excel tips and tricks. So check that out. So this quick access toolbar is where we can start building in or adding features that we use frequently. So for instance, if I want to, if I do something, for instance, I use this, my accounting number format frequently, I can simply right click on this and then left click, add to quick access toolbar. And now it's here regardless of where I want to work. So the auto sum, if I want to add that as well, so it doesn't matter what ribbon tab I'm in, or I could even collapse that ribbon, I could right click on that. But you may be familiar with the fact that the auto sum also includes other functions: average, count, max, and min. And if I'd like to include that as that button, I simply hover over not just the button, but the drop down arrow. And here I'll right click, left click, add to quick access toolbar, and here it is. Now it's possible to rearrange these tools on the quick access toolbar as well. So they don't have to just be randomly placed. But the idea here is that if I was in a different ribbon tab, I could still get to that as well as other tools that may be here. So I want to build that total. Well, I'll simply click on that auto sum button, and here I go. Now I could simply copy that across, but I want to share with you a quick, easy keyboard shortcut. So for sum, the keyboard shortcut is Alt equals. Alt equals. So that is a quick, easy way to do the same thing, to build in that function. And so these are the same logic, whether we type it from scratch, we use the auto sum button, we use Alt equals, they'll all get us to the same place. Now let's look at some of those other functions that are available in that dropdown. Once again, average is something we could type, but instead I'll go to the dropdown and here's average. Now here's a case where we actually, Excel doesn't quite know what we want, and I will highlight just this range here. So I want to have an average. Now the way that average works is if a value is 0, it will include it. If it is blank, it does not include it in the average, even if it's part of the selected range. So we've got our average. Let's look at our high and low. Now this is a very simple set of data, but with a large set of data, it may be really helpful to call out what is our highest value, whether it's a test result, a dollar amount, a quantity, so for inventory or things like that. And so once again, here we can go to that auto sum. Here is my max function. We will then highlight the appropriate range for that and hit enter. And then finally, our min function gives us the minimum or lowest value. Now you might have noticed I did not copy those across, although I certainly could have with that autofill. With the autofill, you work with a largest chunk or portion that you're comfortable with. And so in this case, I will highlight all three of these and then drag across to get those calculations. So this has given us a chance to look then at a variety of this kind of foundational functions, certainly our sum function, average, our max, and our min. And hopefully that gives you some ideas, and remember that keyboard shortcut, Alt equals. Hopefully that's really helpful for you as well. Let me know if you have any questions, but let's go ahead and move forward and look at some other possibilities, some other functions that are always helpful to know. Here I have a list of data where I might want to know how many I have. Now, you don't have to confess, but it's common, and what I often see is, especially if this doesn't start on row 1, is that we might say, well, the number I have is, it starts on row 7 and it ends on this row, 123, and then we do the math for that. Instead, we could just use the count. Now I want to move to the bottom of this column. A quick, easy keyboard shortcut is Control and the down arrow key. Control down. Now I can use Control up, Control right, Control down, Control left. But Control down will move me, it will stop once it hits a blank cell. So in this case, then I'll just arrow down one more time to get me to that place. And I'll just want to zoom in so that you can see this more easily. What I'd like to do is display a count for this column. How many do I have? And here again, we could either type it out, or I'll take advantage of that drop down for the auto sum, and here is count, because this one is going to then guess that range, and here I just confirm that looks good. So this tells me I have 114. Now, should I have a blank entry, that number will change. And that might be just fine, but it's just good to know that. That is, if this was 0, then it will go back to then that total. So that's something to know when you're working with the count function. From here, I'll drag this across. And we have a little bit of a interesting situation. What do you think happened here? Why did we get a result for the first column, but not the second? And the answer to that is count is just for numbers. Count is just for numbers. So we have a variation on that. And the option then for that is, I'm going to come in and edit this one, although I could type it from scratch. I'll double click, or I can use the F2 function key, and count A. Count A is for alphanumeric. So whether it's the letters or numbers, doesn't matter. Count A. And now it works just fine. And I could also have used count A for the previous one. So I will drag backwards with that autofill to copy it, just so that you know that you don't have to have different functions necessarily when it's numbers, or it's numbers, it might have text. So count A is alphanumeric. It's more open to what you are going to be counting in that range of values. So I hope that you already have some helpful options for you. I hope that you already have some, maybe have seen the functions a little differently, or maybe you know that Alt equals is a helpful shortcut for you, and maybe even just picked up some navigation tricks. So that is our count and count A functions. And when you're working with functions, or simply working with simple formulas, one of the things that can be helpful is to kind of see what's going on behind the scenes. That is, what maybe you need to audit your work or someone else's work. So one of the tricks for that is in the formulas tab. And here in the formulas tab, by the way, here is our insert function and our function library. So you can see quite a wide range here, including, for instance, recently used functions that we could then actually select from to start building a function. But for now, my focus is a little further over here, and here is show formulas. Show formulas. This is a great tool that we can enable, and now we can see the formulas. So you could print this out, or you could just simply have it on your screen, and it is a way for you to be able to easily see those formulas. That is, to be able to see what's behind that. And then you turn it off, and it goes back to what is then coming forward as a normal display, whether you're printing it or simply viewing it. And once again, that is something that you could add to that quick access toolbar. Simply right click, left click, and there it is. So it becomes an easy toggle back and forth. And when it comes to building formulas or working with functions, one of the things that can also help you to see those easily, especially if you're having to audit something that's really massive, is Control G, which is go to. We can see this is helpful for us in a number of ways. We can put in a cell address. Here you see a number of different range names. I'll talk about those in just a little bit. Range names, but there's also something called special. So if we come into special, this means that we can isolate certain aspects of our worksheets so that they can be highlighted. So not just going to a particular location, but here, formulas. And these may not include functions, but this can be helpful for you, especially when you're having to audit your work. And I can simply say, okay. And now Excel is highlighting all the places where there are formulas of some sort, whether or not they're functions. We might even change the color of those cells, but it can be very helpful when you may be looking at hundreds or thousands of rows of data to make sure that there is a calculation and that somebody simply didn't enter in a direct number and you're wondering why those totals are not adding up. So that can be a really helpful trick and technique for you, is the Control G, and then you go to the special for that. Well, let's focus on then, let's talk more about cell references, because as I mentioned briefly, these are helpful in a number of ways. It certainly can be especially helpful for you when we're working with functions. So cell references is something that is just automatic. You don't make them happen, although you can certainly change the way that they behave. But these are part of how our formulas and functions can be built. So relative reference is something that's just automatic. The relative reference means that this gives us the ability to be able to copy a formula down or across, because what it basically states is that the content of that formula is going to be relative to its location. So if it started in column B and we copy it across, now instead of referring to cells in column B, they're referring to cells in column C. So that is just built into Excel. But sometimes we may want to build absolute references. Now, an absolute reference means that we are saying always go to this particular location. We can think of it as the GPS in Excel. Regardless of where the formula may be located, we want it to go to a specific location. And then we have a third type of reference which is one we don't want to have. It's a circular reference. I'll show that to you very briefly, because if you have circular references, you need to get rid of them. You need to fix them. It isn't something that you can just simply ignore when a workbook opens with a circular reference. Now, another topic I'll share with you and mentioned earlier is working with range names. Our focus today will be on range names within functions, but this is simply a way to name a cell or multiple cells so that you can label them, and it makes it easier to refer to. You don't need to remember what can seem like archaic range names like A5 through M1026, things like that. And so these also have a use within navigation, printing, and even more advanced areas such as macros. But we'll focus on how range names can be helpful for us. And then you'll see that especially as we move into some of our, as we continue not only today, but next month as well with our functions. So let's go back to Excel and look at how this might be helpful for us. Here we have a situation where we have a total and we want to calculate what the commission might be for that. And this is one of my recommendations as well when you're working with Excel. If you have a particular factor, maybe it's a labor cost, it's a percentage rate, it's commission rate, it's anything like that. If you have a particular value that you're making decisions on, make sure, bring them out. That is, instead of building it into the formula, which we could do with this, display them in a similar way here. Because what this means then is that if we want to build projections, if we want to say, well, what happens if that is 15%? What happens if it's 10%? Well, I don't want to have to change or remember all the places where I may have typed in that value. So extracting them from the formula, that is direct entry in the formula, and putting them here will make this work much more efficiently. Let's look at a quick example. In this case, then, I'm going to say that the commission is equal to, so I start with an equal, and we'll move over to that total, multiply it by, that's our asterisk, and our commission rate. Okay, that looks right. Now, as I drag it down, some of you already know what's going to happen. That did not work so well. Now I might want this commission for sure. That is, here's the problem. If I look at this, that's a relative reference. And so it's saying, take what's the left times what's up so far. And so as that shifted, it went from G3 to G4. And it continues. So although that's a wonderful number, it's not correct. And that's one of the challenges and one of the ways that range names can help you. It's also where absolute references can help you. So let's look at how we could fix this. I'll undo that and start from scratch. So I'll say equal. Here's my total times, I move to that 12%. And now what I'm going to do here is hit the F4 function key, F4. What that does is puts a $ in front of the column and the row. So you've likely seen these in different formulas, and certainly you've probably seen them in formulas that include functions. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover it, but also it helps us to understand the value of range names. Now, there are variations on this absolute reference, and won't touch on that. We do have a video in our YouTube channel that talks about that in more detail. This one is saying, always go to column G. That's because the $sign, and always go to row 3. But there's some different variations depending upon more specialized use, where you may want it to always go to a particular column, but have the row vary. In this case, now I'll go ahead and drag that down. And now I have, you can see, even though that's been copied down, it's a relative reference to the always to the left, but it's an absolute reference to that commission rate. And that's where we have the magic of using absolute references. So that foundationally can help us in a lot of formulas, and also can help us understand how some of the functions will work for us. Because understand, functions are just part of, is a type of formula that we're building. It just has some built-in calculations for us. Now, I'll share with you very briefly what an absolute reference is, because in Excel, we don't want them. They are bad, and you can't ignore them, because an absolute reference, excuse me, a circular reference, that's a bad one. Circular reference means that the logic of the formula cannot be resolved, so you are not getting accurate answers. Let's see what happens with that. I'll go ahead and open up another workbook, and notice what happens here. So if you have seen this before, and you don't have to confess, but if you have seen this before, you can't just keep saying, okay. And help isn't going to be very helpful, unfortunately. So with this, then I'll say, okay, but I have to resolve that. Otherwise, I'm making decisions on data that isn't accurate. Now, where is that circular reference? Well, that isn't necessarily going to be in this worksheet. One of the things that you might see is that in the very bottom corner of our screen, there it says circular references. So that's in our status bar. It says circular references, but but that could be there. You might, if you have multiple workbooks open, that circular reference could be there for multiple ones. So how do we find this? We go to formulas, error checking, and here is circular references. So if we have at least one, it will display, and we may have to repeat this action if we have multiple ones. So I'm going to move to this. And in this case, then let's look and see what the problem might be. Now I'll give you the answer, because I do want to make sure that you get a chance to see a lot of other functions here. In this case, we're including ourselves. So the value has gone to 0, even though it's not correct. The range includes H9, which is where the formula is. So it cannot resolve itself, which means that we're seeing have a total that isn't actually accurate. So in this case, I could fix that, or I have a little error message here in Excel, and I could copy the formula from above, which I will do. And now, notice now our total has increased by this much. Make sure that when you're in Excel, if you see that circular references, either on your own or with coworkers, you need to fix that. You need to resolve it. That is, it means that there's some logic that may be dependent upon a number, that may be dependent on another number that goes back to that original value, and somehow it's going round and round and round. So it's not able to resolve itself. So that's a quick look at the idea of circular references as well as the other types of references. But let's return and continue our look at functions. Now, I shared with you that range names can be extremely helpful, especially when you have more complex arguments and functions. Here's a quick look at what I mean by range names. Let's say that I have this total And instead of being an F9, it's thousands of rows down. Well, I'm going to give it a label. So I'll move to that cell. In the upper left-hand corner here, right above our first column, is what's called a name box. I'll click in there. And going to type in here the range name. Now, some rules to know about range names. They can have a number, a letter, that is, the name can include numbers, letters, or the underscore. They cannot have any other punctuation. Spaces are not allowed. Now, in this case, I've used what's called title case. Now, title case just means I'm capitalizing the first letter of each word. You do not have to do that. It could be all lowercase, all uppercase. It's good to use something that's a little bit more descriptive. And we also don't want to use anything that sounds like a cell range. So in this case, trips total is what I'm using for this. You'll see a lot of use in range names as well. We'll in part 2 of this training. So I'll just hit enter. Now I'm going to move to actually another workbook, another worksheet, and I'll go to that name box. Here I have a lot of other range names, but I could also just type in a cell address here. Here is trips total. I can navigate right to it. So that's one of the magic of the range name. And then I don't have to use absolute references. I have that, it really solves that for me. Now, there may be situations where I also want to, I may not want to use the name box. That is, the name box is great for simple, easy ones. In the formulas tab here, we have a group of options related to range names. I've selected this range and I'll go to define name. And in this case, Y is a good suggestion. The scope is the workbook, meaning there cannot be any other range names called Y in the workbook. There is a more specific scope, but that's a little bit more advanced. So I'll simply okay. And now I have that as another way. And then finally, if we want to manage our range names, so if you wanted to change the name of that trips total or something, you can't do that in the name box. We go to the name manager. Here we can see a number of different range names that are available to us, and we can go to them, we can delete them, we can edit them. And you'll, as I mentioned, you'll see that we're continuing to use these now as well as next month. So how can we leverage those range names? Well, they will be helpful for us as we start building our formulas. So let's look at that example we had before. Instead of using absolute references, I'm going to go to that commission rate, move to my name box, and I'll call this commission rate. Remember, no space in that. No, it's not that you can't use absolute references, but I'll make equal total times. Notice that it fills that in. I just go to that cell and so a range name makes this and it takes the place of an absolute reference because we're saying go to this location. And now it becomes very easy for me to copy it down. But the value I have is the more descriptive I am, then this becomes more human than computerese. So I hope that you'll find that to be helpful for you as well. Let's build on the range names and also explore some other functions. So what we've got coming up, we'll look at the if function, we'll look at countif, sumif, average-if. Now the if function is frequently used for analysis. And it has 3 different arguments to it. The first is, what is it that you want to test? What is it you want to evaluate? Comma. The second one is, what happens if it's true? What do you want to have done? Maybe it's a calculation. Maybe you want to display some text. Maybe, maybe you just want to put in a value. What happens if it's true, comma, and then what should you do if it's false? So those are the three parts of the if function. It's frequently used in Excel, and we often will nest other functions inside of that as well. So that is the basic structure. Now, what we're going to use this for, and what we'll explore then, is a variety of different if functions. We have some range names that have already been created. So for instance, if I select this value here, we can see in my name box that's called low goal, high goal, but I want to create one for commission and for bonus. So I don't have to create them this way. And remember, they don't have to be capitalized. So I'm able to refer to these values because they have range names. That makes it a lot easier than those absolute references, although that certainly has a place. So let's look at how the if function will work for this. We're going to use the insert function to make this easier, especially if you haven't used a function for a while or you're new to one. It'll walk you through, as I mentioned before. So this is where I want to see the answer. That's always where we start. The insert function is either found to the left of the formula bar, or it is on the far left of the formulas ribbon tab. So let's look at this. With the insert function, first of all, even though this implies that you would be able to just, Excel will figure this out for you, I recommend that you really have a good idea of where you're heading. You can then in this dropdown pick all or pick them by categories. Now, in my most recently used happens to be if, so I'll pick it this way, although you can find it in other ways. Next, here we see how Excel will help you with those functions. And the first thing it wants to know is the logical test. And so in this case, I'll just move this aside so you can see the idea. And that is that the total that's to the left here is greater than or equal to. So these are operators you want to be familiar with. Greater than, less than, would go the other way. Equals, if you wanted to say not equal to, it would be the less than, and greater than, not equal to. So I want to say greater than or equal to the sales goal. That's what we're testing. Notice on the right-hand side, Excel is saying that's not true for that value. So it's a good way to check it. What happens if it's true? Well, in this case, what we want to do is take that total and multiply it times the commission. And here again, this is why range names can be so helpful to you. So we're going to calculate by that commission. So this is instead of typing in 2%, which can be a problem if you decide later that you want it to, if you're looking at different values. And what happens if it's false? Well, here I want it to say NA. Now I could put in any kind of text, like find another job or something like that. One of the things you'll see here is Excel is going to put this in quotes. I don't have to do that here because Excel's helping me build this formula. However, if we were typing it directly, Excel is going to put quotes on that. So let's go ahead now and enter this in and see what happens. So this is what it looks like. What are we testing? And you can see here, Excel is walking us through that. What happens if it's true? What happens if it's false? Now, keep in mind, this training session is recorded and it will be made available later on our YouTube channel. So you can always come back to review these particular sections. So this is then how this is set up. I'll go ahead and enter that and copy it down. Now here's another shortcut that can be helpful. We move to here a little, the fill handle, and I'm going to, instead of dragging it down, I'm going to double click. And that might be worth all your time just here. That is, even though I can't hear you, there's probably a few of you going, wow. So let's look at that again. I move to that bottom right-hand corner, double click, and that's the same thing as dragging it down. But if you have hundreds of rows, that's a lot faster. So this is the commission. And you can see then this is only for those that were greater than or equal to that 8,500. But if I change that value, that's one of the magics of having these range names, so that I'm referencing whatever happens to be in this cell. So that's one of the things to look at for that. So that's one consideration here. Now, let's look at a couple other variations on that if formula function, and then I'll share with you a couple other data analysis functions before we wrap up. One of the things that we have with this is that we might, here we have, for instance, training completed, yes or no. So there might be some different things that we want to evaluate. And as I mentioned, we can have functions nested within other functions. And in this case, there are other functions where, let's say we have multiple criteria we want to look at. So what can help us there with if is and, or, and also not, although that's, it's less used less often. For this one, I'll use an and that means I have multiple criteria. I want to say winner circle is, I want that to say yes if training is completed is yes, and the total is greater than or equal to this high goal. So this is we're letting Excel do the analysis for us. That is the value of that. Excel is doing the analysis for us. How does this look? Well, I'm going to type this out manually, but keep in mind, you could still use your insert function for that. So equal if, open parentheses. Here I want to do the and. It doesn't matter if you do it uppercase or lowercase. Excel will convert that for you. And means I'm going to have two or more criteria. So the first one for this is that this cell training, this is where training is. Okay, that equals, and I'm going to have this be exactly how those answers would be. So I have in quotes, that is quotes in Excel. This is what's called a character string. So this is then how we display text. It has to be in quotes, otherwise Excel is going to think it's a range name or a function name, or it's going to give you an error. So the training is equal to yes, comma, and our total sales, which is F8, is greater than or equal to this higher level, high goal. So those are the two criteria. We could have three or more, but both of them have to be true. If both of them are true in this case, then what do we want it to say? We're going to say yes. Notice I'm putting in the quotes because it's a character string. I want to display this. So whatever the term, it could be multiple words. And then if I want it to be left blank, so the next part, what happens if it's false? I could say no, or if you want to leave it blank, I'll do quote, quote. So just know that that's another option there. We need to put something in there for the what happens if it's false, but we might want to leave that blank. So those are the three parts. If the training is yes, and the total is greater than or equal to that high goal, say yes. Otherwise, leave it blank. Let's see what happens. So we know the first one's going to be blank. If I copy this down, all of them are blank. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there's an error. It might mean that it's doing exactly what we asked. And that's why you may want to have the word no rather than have it be blank. But let's look at how we could fix something, or well, not fix it, but let's see what happens. So here we have someone who exceeded that goal. What if that changed to yes? Now, this is the magic of the analysis. Instead of manually going through it, you're letting Excel help you out with that. Or what if that sales goal was changed to 14,000? Okay. This is the magic of using range names and not building that into the formula. And now we have someone else who has joined us in the winner circle. So this is then the value of being able to build analysis with the if function. And I hope you're starting to get some inspiration about what might be helpful for you. Now, there can be certainly a lot more complexity for these and how these would work and how you would go about them. If you see something like this one that's pretty complex, this is where it can be helpful to go to insert function, because then you can, maybe someone else has built it out, because you can have ifs nested inside of ifs. So this is then where you might be able to say, I'm not sure if I could figure out what that means, but I'm also share with you that there might be an even better solution. So let's go ahead and look at that. We have a couple other functions we want to cover. Certainly, one of those I'd like to at least give you a peek at is something called ifs, IFS. It's a relatively new one. So the restriction on that is it's only available in Office 365 and Excel 2019. It is not backwards compatible, so it's might be limited right now depending upon how you share your data and what version of Excel you're working with. So know that it's something that there might be more that you want to, but it might be something that would be helpful for you. Now, why would it be useful for us? Well, the way the ifs work is it tends not to have such complexity, because with this one, for instance, it basically, we can start at a particular level and then just simply put in, okay, if it's equal to this, then do something. If it's equal to this, do something else. And we don't have to layer multiple ifs. So here's just a quick example of what that might look like. I think I'll move to this one because it's a little bit easier to see. And basically, what happens here is to say, if this value is 100, say okay. If it's 200, say warning. Okay. And this should, I don't know where that happened there. So this should be M8. If M8 equals 300, say error. If none of those things are true, then say invalid. That is, you're basically ruling out, you're going to be going through this where the ifs, IFS, is going to take the different matches that you have. And if none of those match, what happens with that? Thank you very much. Sorry about that. I was coughing. So let's review here. If you have questions, let us know about that that ifs function there. But so Countif is set up so that in this case, I'm going to say equal Countif. Then one of the things that we'll do with that is we'll say, what's the range? Now this could be a range name, but in this case, it's just what's yellow. So I'll just highlight this. And it is a range name there, comma. Doesn't have to be though, okay? And what am I searching for? Well, I've given this a range name as well. Once again, I do not have to. And so it's going to tell me that I have 6 of these, even though it might not be in just one column, or it might just be in one row. So in this case, then I'm going to, what happens if I change this? It's not case sensitive. That is, if these are capitalized or lowercase, it'll still find as long as it has those characters. So Countif can be helpful when you have a large range of data and you want to see how many do I have within that, even if it could just be in one column. So let's wrap up and look at that. Here I have some different functions. Here again, remember that all of this is recorded. So if you wanted to be able to see those screens, or if you want to capture a screenshot, here's the basic idea. I've color coded them just so you can see this idea. So what if I want to know how many by country? Well, I can just do that for Countif. So I'll say, oops, our total, that's a sum if. So I'll do equal sum if. Where am I looking? This is where I'm looking. What's green? Could be a range name. It isn't in this case, but it could be, comma. What am I looking for? I'm looking for the match to what's in blue, comma. What do I want to sum? That's going to be this matching range. That is, it's good if it's just a parallel range. It might not be right next to it, but this is what I want to sum based upon that criteria. And I'll close paren and enter. Oh, what happened there? Oh, well, we have a spelling error. Sum if. That looks a lot better. Okay. So with that, then this is telling us how many I have that match. That's the total registration fee. Let's look at average if. And this is where that autocomplete can be helpful for us. So I wouldn't have that spelling error, right? Where am I looking? I'm looking in where the countries are, comma, what am I looking for? That's the match. And what do I want to average? That will be where I have those fees. And one more is the Countif, which we looked at before. That's simpler. Where am I looking? Comma, what am I looking for? So this is giving me a summary of this data. Now, if this changes, for instance, notice how the values change as well. So that gives us some options for data analysis that can be a lot more powerful and be huge time savers for us. That's really what we're looking for, that we really want to have these be a big time saver for us. I hope that you have picked up more than one tip, but that you've gotten either a start or gone further in your understanding of what's possible with Microsoft Excel functions. We're going to continue our look next month, February 8th, when we dig into VLOOKUP, XLOOKUP. We look at date functions and text functions so that you can really take advantage of Excel and leverage these functions as much as possible. We will then, we have a schedule then through certainly for 2022. Then in March, we'll look at Microsoft Word, collaboration tools, and there will be more options as well, including Teams, and Microsoft Office. So that's what we have coming up. I hope you will join us next month as we continue our look at functions. This has been our exploration of functions in Excel. Join us next month. I hope you have some great takeaways with us. Until then, let us know how we can help you to be more productive. Please reach out to us for IT services and consulting to support you with your Microsoft technologies. I'm Dawn with K-Square Technologies. Thanks for joining us.